Men outlived the dinosaurs. And vinyl outlived the iPod. Chew on that while we flip on over to the B-side. This is Vinyl Community Podcasts.
All right, buddies, welcome back. Vinyl Community Podcast coming at you. We're doing another edition, back by popular or unpopular demand, you decide, of what we're calling the KISS Roundtable number 2. And if you heard our first version of this, this is the last year KISS is actively touring, and we kind of talked about that in the last show. We do, yeah, we've got some folks wearing the gear here. But just want to kind of talk about the band. I said in our original episode, I'm going to my first KISS show this year. I know that makes me kind of a mark, but in my process of wanting to learn more about the band, I kind of leaned out to some folks in the vinyl community who I knew were KISS-torians in their own right. And we're joined by another one today, and we'll get into that in a second. But anyway, just to kind of learn more about the band, talk about the band, get some insights about, it would take me hours, weeks, months, etc., to kind of get even anywhere close to the subject matter expertise of our guests. So I'm being kind of lazy, to be honest with you, and I'm just going to pick their brains. But joining me, concert buddy, for this rendition is a couple of returning faces and a new person too. We'll start with our new friend. If you've watched any of the Patrick Vinyl Archivist live stream, I'm sure you've seen Mark. I know you have your band Projekt Gemineye, right?
Correct.
Thanks for joining us, Mark.
Thank you very much for having me on here. I'm looking forward to this.
Happy to. And I full disclosure, Mark is a professional at this KISS podcast stuff. Your podcast is called, tell us?
The KISS FAQ podcast.
So I'm going to try to do my best not to make us look too sad in comparison to a full-fledged KISS podcast. And then we've got Dylan, the record spinner, joining us again, back for a round numero dos. Dylan, how you doing?
I am doing fantastic.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us again, sir. And then one of the most surprising turn of events in the history of the vinyl community is our resident jazz bum, Felipe, is secretly into the metal and the rock. And if you would have heard, he was spilling some real tea on some stories right before we got online. So Felipe, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Chance. Thanks everyone for joining. It's going to be a blast. I mean, who doesn't like talking KISS, right? So
well, listen, Felipe and I were already trading messages before we went live here, and Felipe in full rock and roll mode has already been hitting the sauce. He's already been hitting some briefly. So this is going to be like that famous performance, KISS Unplugged. This is probably going to be Felipe Unplugged. So I'm looking forward to seeing what we get out of it.
Fully plugged. Let's see.
Good stuff. Well, guys, Felipe, full credit again, kind of came up with this topic we'll do for this presentation, and that's kind of talking about the wins, the losses, the merits, and everything in between of really, I guess, two principal eras. And obviously, they started with the makeup, and then they took the makeup off, and then they came back to the makeup, and the lineup changes and all that stuff. But to make it a very simple kind of conversation, we're just calling it the masked or unmasked eras. And want to hear your thoughts, and maybe, Mark, since you're our guest, we'll give you the floor first. 1983, if I've got the numbers right, was about when they made the decision to take off the kabuki makeup and go a different direction, at least from the visual representation of what they're. Dylan, did I have the year wrong there?
You were right on 83, and that runs up to 95.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. So Mark, help me, a novice, again, going to my first show this year. Mm-hmm. What was kind of their thought process in going to such a radical direction? I mean, obviously, music was changing about that time, and you're getting into a lot of the, for lack of a better word, the hair metal bands. A lot of the music videos were all looking the same. There's a lot of cookie cutter element, and KISS kind of was going in that direction in their own way. Tell us about what the band was thinking at that time.
Well, I mean, from what I understand and from what I've read and heard and, all the discussions I've had over the years, this was not something that was, all of a sudden this, spurred on them. They were thinking about doing this from as far back as The Elder. They wanted to get out of the makeup, I mean, they did for Creatures of the Night, surprisingly enough, they wanted to get out of the makeup then, even, right? But a lot of people, well, Gene Simmons was the one who was very unsure about getting out of the makeup because, to him, the makeup is everything to him. It's his second persona. It's where he feels the most comfortable on stage. When he was afraid that when he take that off and he has to be Gene Simmons' regular man on stage, he didn't know what to expect was going to happen. Would he be able to come off looking, play? He was afraid of if he could play the part still. You know what I mean? That's very much his fear in that. And Paul, at that point, he wanted off the makeup. He wanted to do, just regular rock clothes. He wanted to get in, and I mean, you can tell right away when you watch that couple of bootleg shows from like the Lick It Up tour, for example. You can tell Paul was the most comfortable. He was sitting there doing split kicks and running around the stage. He was so happy he was in running shoes now.
He was free.
Yeah, no more heavy boots and ridiculous things that he had to wear, and take off on stage. So he was happy with that, and I'm sure Eric Carr was happy to have something a bit, easier to wear on stage. Same with Bruce and whoever was the guitar player, even Vinny and those guys, right? But Gene was the one who was kind of like, oh, I don't know. And you can always tell with him, he was always the one who had the most problems. You could tell throughout the years. I mean, at one point, they were calling him Maud because he looked like, he looked like a really bad dressed woman on Asylum, during those days. It was ridiculous how he looked during those times. But, they finally figured it out as time went on. But to answer your question initially, by 83, even Gene knew that they had to do something because for the Creatures of the Night, that was supposed to be their big comeback album, right? And that was supposed to be their big comeback tour in the United States. Or they booked originally 100 shows in the United States to play, and that tour completely tanked on them. Like they had to cut it short, and they were booking 10,000 seat arenas and having 2,000 people show up. I mean, Paul Stanley said that the saddest thing is when you go on stage and you throw your pick in the air and it goes over the audience and lands on the floor because there's so little people there. So they knew they had to make a change to save the band, and it worked for them. It did, it became a platinum record for them, Lick It Up, and the tour did increase drastically in numbers, and then even more so with the next album after that, Animalize.
So interesting point there, because I know that Kiss has kind of tweaked their sound over the years, and late 70s there was, and correct me if I'm wrong, guys, I don't want to speak out of school here, but there was some music they put in late 70s that had some disco flavor, more dance, more poppy. Again, when I think of the Unmasking starting in 83 at Look It Up, like you said, I'm thinking of they're embracing the spandex and the pyro and that formula that was really starting to kind of emerge as like safe. And not in a bad way, but commercially speaking, like you're talking about, Mark, is that, to come off of a tour that was very below expectations to change your brand identity for a band that was already kind of changing a little bit of their sound over the years. Dylan, do you kind of see it that way too, that, they were not necessarily chasing trends, but just adapting their playbook to being more contemporary, being, more commercial, because obviously, if anything, Gene has demonstrated and the band's demonstrated that the money is important. It's not everything, but it is definitely an important part of the sauce. Do you see it that way too?
So I think they had a solid foundation going when Lick It Up and Animalize did as well as they did. But then when you go on to Asylum and you look at the image that they were going for, it was all about chasing trends, and glam metal was the hot flavor. So, of course, you look at the outfits, it's neon, it's flashy, it's appalling. And then you go to Crazy Nights. They work with Ron Nevison, who had just come off the heels of working on #1 hits with Heart. So Kiss goes pop a little bit. So, it kind of like that mid to late 80s period is kind of like the wilderness years, at least in my eyes, where they were just kind of adapting to what was going on in the music scene, putting it in the Kiss mold and seeing if that would bring on good fortunes. And, come 1989 going into 90, Hot in the Shade tour. I mean, I won't even talk about the album Hot in the Shade. I have plenty of unnice things to say. But the tour, they start digging back into the past and they start representing the 70s material. And once Revenge came in, I think outside of Lick It Up, that was the most comfortable they felt out of makeup, because it was black leather, more street clothes driven. They just looked comfortable. And then that was, I think that, to be honest, that was the peak of the non-makeup period, because then you go into the conventions and then reunion period afterwards. It's a domino effect, essentially.
It's interesting that you say that, though, because while they did appear to have their look down pat by Revenge, it is unfortunate, though, that by that point people were already checking out again with KISS. I mean, that Revenge tour again had to be cut short because the attendance was brutal. But then again, timeline is a thing to think about as well. You're talking about 91, 92. They're starting to get the wrinkles and the crinkles of grunge creaking in here now. Yep. So people are kind of like, KISS.
I'm glad they didn't start wearing flannels. That would have been a little bit too much.
Yeah, exactly. but they did screw things up with it. Doing Carnival of Souls. That was their grunge attempt, and that was brutal. But Dylan's right. For Hot in the Shade, the record is terrible. It's basically just demos, that they did and just patched up a bit and just, put a little bit of production sheen on it and then released it. And plus, it's way too long. It's like 15 songs on there.
Yeah,
what KISS
make it 10.
Yeah. So, but the tour was phenomenal. That tour saved them, okay, because that was really well attended. But what people seem to forget, but I'm sure.
Do you think it was Forever's radio exposure?
Yeah. Forever was the thing that saved them, because they delayed that tour for a long time after that record came. They didn't go on tour for a long time. And then when Forever broke, then they went out on tour, and then they got the numbers that they were looking for, because that was their first top 10 hit since Beth, that song, So it was pretty important. And that tour, if you're going to watch any tour on a bootleg on YouTube, check out the Hot in the Shade stuff. You won't be disappointed.
It's good. Yeah.
So Felipe, kind of coming back to you did birth of this topic, so probably I could have started with you too, but obviously a different perspective. Obviously as we've talked about all over the place about really getting into metal and getting into rock music, where you were and Rio and so forth. Yeah. Is it safe to say, and correct me if I'm wrong, was this when you were able to start going to the shows? Was during the Unmasked era? Or kind of walk us through it and walk us through early impressions of because you talked about this on our last show about how your introduction to the band and that sort of thing, but did anything change as now they've taken the makeup off in your mind?
So my intro to KISS was 82. First time they went to Brazil, of course, it was 4. I couldn't go to the show, but they made a huge impact. I mean, it was everywhere: magazine, newspaper, TV. They were everywhere there, and I think they packed 200,000-300,000 people on those concerts in Brazil. It was massive. It was this kind of scary, but at the same time so attractive. You want to listen to that. But then they quickly went to Unmasked. I started catching up back with KISS Forever. So if you guys don't know, soap operas in Brazil, they're huge and they're exported all over the world. There's a really, really well done product. And Forever was on the soundtrack of one of them. They had a really kick back there. And, MTV went to Brazil only in 91. So, and then God Gave Rock and Roll to You too, started having a huge rotation there. And it was kind of nostalgic, right? Showing the current KISS, but referring back to the old times. That was 92. Then 94, they played Monsters of Rock in Brazil. I think Anthrax also there. And I went to that show, and I was really, I got to catch up and go back and revisit. And most of the material available was the 80s. And Animalize was one of my first records, and Unmasked. And then I started going to used record stores. I bought, Alive, Destroyer, and the whole thing. But still, the Unmasked KISS had a huge impact. And I like Animalize. There's, so many great songs there. Asylum, good songs, but poor production, I think. But when I bought my Lick It Up and Creatures of the Night, which I still have, was like, dude, these guys, they play so well. And then going back to the old records, I think my first original Kiss I bought was Hotter Than Hell, which sound-wise sucks. Has great songs, but sound-wise sucks. It's a terrible record to listen to, in my opinion. I think it's really poorly recorded. It sounds really bad. And then I got the first one. I think Dress to Kill is a really good sounding record. It has really fast, nice songs. It's one of my favorites, Dress to Kill, to be honest. And then I started putting the pieces together. But I think my biggest introduction was the Unmasked era Kiss. I bought my VHS Kiss Exposed, which I still have from those days. And they kind of go back and forth, masked, unmasked. But I think Unmasked was my biggest exposure introduction earlier. And I think, let's put some gasoline in the fire here. I think hot take time. As musicians, the formation with Paul, Gene, Bruce, and Eric Carr was the best. As musicians,
100%.
Way better. I think Ace Frehley and Peter Criss, they're okay, but Eric Carr and Bruce Kulick, that formation, if they were at a different point in time, maybe this could be like much better, much better.
Well, I got to stop you there, Felipe, because people may be driving their cars in the ditches when they're listening to this. The fact that you just assassinated two of the founding members in Ace and Peter, and it's interesting because, again, novice here, when I hear that 1980 album Unmasked, like naturally I would think, oh, that's when they took the makeup off, but it's not, right? It was what was, guys, and Dylan, I'll ask you what. I mean, clearly it's Unmasked is the name of the album, but they didn't take the masks off for another 2 albums, right?
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
So what was the thought? Because I know, and correct me on my history, or this is just homework I did, but Peter at that point was no longer on his way out of the band. Anton Fig, I think, was doing the drumming. Eric Carr hadn't come into the orbit just yet, but
you've been doing your homework.
Well, hey, listen. Fake it till you make it, boys. Fake it till you make it. But point being is that, coming into it, you're like, oh yeah, I know they took the masks off. I know that they quit wearing the paint. But then there's this album Unmasked, and those two things are not, symbiotic. Yeah. There's a difference there.
Yeah, one would think that would be the culmination. I mean, I think honestly, and I feel like I should know. I feel like part of that was just down to just the design of that particular album cover, because like the paparazzi were always trying to get a glimpse of them without makeup, which that was true back in 76, 77, back when they were at their peak. Everyone was just itching to see them without it. So I guess they kind of just played along with that. But as to the motive as to why they would name it that, probably just tied in with the cover itself and the whole.
Mark, do you got any inside information? I mean,
let's put it this way. If you want to know more about why these things happen, I'll give you one good recommendation. See this book here? Okay. This book is what you want to get because it has everything about this album in this time period in there. Now, Julian did a great job with doing a lot of...
Tell us what's the name of it and so forth, or the folks just listening.
Well, it's called Mass Hysteria.
Okay.
The World Tour 80 to 81 by Julian Gill, and Julian's the founder, creator of the KISS FAQ podcast and the KISS FAQ message board, and he's the leading authority for KISS stuff. Okay, right. I mean, if you want to know about KISS stuff, you get him on your show, and he has all kinds of stuff that he's collected over the years and articles and stuff, and. In here, there's a good picture in here. And of course, being that this is like how many pages? 240 pages. It's difficult to kind of remember where in this book this is. Sure. But there is a sketch of the original album cover, which was slightly different than the one that they ended up using for the album cover. There's a little bit more, like scantily clad women on the front of it.
No,
and stuff.
Hard to believe.
Yeah, I mean, I know that they for sure thought that was a bad idea, So, knowing KISS, but I think that there was a reason that they probably switched it. And don't forget too, people are always wondering, well, why did they do such a makeup cover like that? A cartoon cover. Sorry. Gene Simmons is a huge cartoon fan. I mean, he's collected comics since he was a young kid. So I wouldn't be surprised. And I think it, in fact, is Gene's idea to have that kind of comic strip idea for the album cover on there.
Makes sense.
And this was a topic that we talked about on the KISS FAQ several times about the biggest problem that we had. One of our co-hosts had is that at the bottom it says, "I still think they suck." And he goes, "Why would you be so stupid to put something like that on your album cover? You're telling people out there that, people think that you suck. Talk about diverting people from buying your album." You know what I mean? Like he had a big issue with that. And, I can understand that it was meant to be like, a reference to what the media thought of them throughout the years. Right. But he made a good point, because if you're new to KISS and you go and pick up that album cover and you follow the comic strip thing and you see at the end he says, "I still think this band sucks." Well, what would you think? Like,
right.
I'm putting this back down.
Conversion rate, yes.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah. So, I mean, I think that the album cover was Gene's brainchild, sort of, because I know that Paul has been in one of the books that I have. I think it's maybe it's the Glickman Marx guy there. I forget his name again, but their business manager. Help me out there, Dylan. What was that guy's name again?
It's not Chris Len, is it?
That's it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
Chris Len.
Boom! I knew
Chris Len.
That's in the business. What's up?
Yeah. In his book, they were talking about this part, and Paul said, "I wanted to go down on record that I think this album cover is a very bad idea." He was talking about Unmasked, and that was in his book. He said that. So
interesting. Well, even so, you have Unmasked, and then there's even a couple more albums before they truly embrace removing the makeup. What if anything changed in that period? Because I mean, Felipe, you kind of kicked it off. The lineup started to change. That Peter was out of the band in '80. A brief period, Anton Fig, and then Eric Carr comes into the orbit.
Comes in, yeah.
Help me out with the Ace piece. I know Ace was in the band longer than Peter, but probably not by much, because then there was a change there. So how? At what point did the lineup start changing post the Unmasked album? Then you got the Elder and what's the other one? Creatures of the Night.
And then, what was Bob Kulick playing before Vinnie Vincent?
Bob Kulick was a ghost session player. He was basically was what's called a ghost session player, where he would do stuff and not get credited on the album for it, because they wanted to make it, because he's been ghosting for as far back as like Alive 2. All right. Okay. So he was on the Alive 2 studio things. All those guitar solos, for the exception of Rocket Ride, that's Bob Kulick. That's not Ace Frehley. Right. So But go ahead, Felipe, finish.
No, I was just saying, I think that transition 70s, 80s was a transitional point for so many bands, right? I mean, the old school metal, progressive or whatever, punk was just coming, post-punk. There's so much stuff changing. I think bands were trying to adapt to that, and the audiences.
Oh, and you also had, not to cut you off, Felipe, but like MTV was coming into vogue, right?
Exactly.
So now you had a new medium of distribution and also promoting your brand, right? Like the famous story that I think it's the most ironic story of all is who is the guy? Billy Squier, big star. Oh, yeah. And there's that song, Video Killed the Radio Star. It literally
was actually the first video played. Yeah,
right. It was, but years later, then you've got that famous Billy Squier video, "Rock Me in the Night," I think it was, or whatever it was, where he's literally dancing and prancing, and it literally, I didn't kill the guy's career, but like he was a big star for.
Oh, radio. It ruined it.
Yeah. But it basically, people are like, what's going on here, right? So anyway, I say that because with MTV raising to prominence and kind of changing the zeitgeist of popular presentation, and you also had a new way to tell the stories of the music through the video medium. So like I'm assuming that was probably part of the band's process too, because like I don't know, again, it could go a lot of different ways, but with music changing exactly what you're talking about, now you had this big monster of MTV to also contend with, and also get your music across. So sorry.
Music presentation industry, everything was changed. I think they tried to adapt, and they took them maybe 10 years to figure out exactly what to do. Because bands that were like driving in the 80s, they kind of started then, right? Think about 82, 83, that's why all the hair metal bands they started, and they started right up with MTV. they're being tailored by the labels, which is something that doesn't happen nowadays. If you think about back in the day, you'd sign a contract, the label like, okay, let's record 1, 2 records, kind of get you on track, and then
Build you,
you're gonna
develop
explode.
you, create. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and now it's just you gotta be famous right off the bat. So, and those bands, they were like hatching from like the early 80s, and those guys from the 70s, the old guys, right? They were having a hard time. I mean, look at the late Led Zeppelin from 76 and on. They couldn't figure out what to do, right? They were lost.
Yeah.
Not sure.
Like Pink Floyd too. I mean, right? Everybody.
Yeah, I mean, you make a good point, Felipe. Like evolving is like super important, especially for any kind of longevity in this industry, any kind of entertainment industries. You have to, I would say, be a chameleon. That's kind of cliche, but you have to change with the time. Sometimes, like you said earlier, Dylan, like they were chasing the trend, like in a lot of respects, and even later when they were kind of dilly-dallying doing their grunge thing. So, but like in terms of the lineup, and we diverged from that a little bit. Felipe, you had the hot take of you feel that this lineup with Eric Carr and who was the guitar player? Sorry,
and Bruce Cooley. Yeah,
you feel that this was the strongest lineup, stronger than arguably the founding fathers. And why would you say that? Is it the musicianship, or do you really feel that like the injection
I think
of
musicianship.
do you feel like the injection of this new members really kind of helped like re-energize, refocus, whatever you want to say about Paul and Gene at this point to really get them to lock in?
Yeah, I think musicianship. I mean, if you look at the very first early lineup, and correct me guys if I'm wrong, or say what you say, but I mean, they were huge different players, and I mean, Gene Simmons had this mission: I want to be successful, I want to make money, I want to explode. Paul Stanley was a rocker; he liked to have fun and play. Paul and Ace and Peter were totally different, like more jazz and funk kind of stuff. And but I think when the 80s lineup came together, they had the same mindset. They have the same backgrounds, and they were terrific musicians. I mean, Eric Carr was like a terrific drummer. I think it was the best KISS drummer ever. No question about it to me.
I see you shaking your head, Mark.
I don't know.
So feel free to chime in. Yeah.
Honestly, I think Eric Singer could do laps around Eric Carr, in my opinion.
Yeah.
He's a great drummer, and I mean, it's funny. There was a KISS convention back when they were doing the convention tour, and Eric Singer was doing a drum thing, talking about drumming, and he was getting really annoyed about that actually, because people were asking, "What do you think of Tommy Lee?" And he's like, "He's all right. I still think I'm better than him," and he was really annoyed with that because, look, the guy's been around for a long time. He was in Black Sabbath back when they did the 7 Star record. I mean, he was with Lita Ford for a while, and he did a long stint with Alice Cooper. This guy, and he was fantastic with Alice Cooper. I mean, well, if you watch some of those shows with him on there, he's the backbone of that band. And as soon as they brought him in to KISS, that's when everything changed. Like, let's put it this way: I have in my old band, I had my drummer. He was huge into Neil Peart. Okay, and so he was like very snobbish with drummers. He hated KISS. He didn't like Peter Criss at all. He thought it was garbage and stuff like that. But as soon as Eric Singer joined the band and he heard the Revenge album and he saw them like playing live, he was converted. He immediately was like a KISS fan. He's like, okay, this is my guy, because he's technically really sound, but he's still a metal drummer. You know what I mean? But that to me was one of my favorite lines. But ironically, my favorite live lineup of the band was when they were doing the farewell tour in Japan, and this lineup lasted very short. It was Eric Singer, Paul Stanley, Gene Simmons, and Ace Frehley. Then, okay, that was really good because they had a really solid, amazing drummer to keep them and hold them together, and then Ace could be a little sloppy here and there, and it wouldn't matter because he could just do his thing, and he kept them together. That was the problem back in the day with Peter Criss, because don't forget, you said that Peter Criss is a jazz guy, and he was very jazzy. Ace Frehley was a rocker as well. He was into the Who, Jimi Hendrix, stuff like that. But the problem was those guys were into the drinking the booze a lot and the poop up the nose a bit too much, And so that's when it started going downhill. And that's when Paul and Gene were like, listen, we got to do something about these guys, And they were afraid to because they had a formula that was selling. They were selling millions of albums. And
of course.
They were playing. So why would they get rid of them? But they had to try to keep these guys under control. And by Dynasty, Peter Criss is already not drumming on that album. He only drummed on one song. Anton Fig did that album as well. And then by the next album, Unmasked, he was gone completely out of the picture from there because they just couldn't handle him anymore. So
Dylan, I saw you like shaking your finger in agreement. Do you agree with what Mark just said there about that was probably the penultimate lineup of during that tour in Japan? I think you said it was.
I think just in term as well, like with what you were saying, Mark, the Ace could be a little sloppier. If you think about the internal politics of what was going on at that time, bringing Eric into the fold on drums was a godsend. It just boosted up the morale, and then Ace just kind of fell off again, and Tommy's in, and the rest is KISS-tory. But no, that's a solid lineup, between Gene, Paul, Ace, and Eric Singer. I mean, the Off the Soundboard show from Tokyo is a living testament to that.
Oh, yeah.
You got to hear it for yourself.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So going back, so you said, Mark, that the Revenge album, they were still in the Unmasked period, right? Or was that the reindoctrination into putting the makeup back on?
No.
That was the last Unmasked album.
Yeah, it was the last album. Well, technically, Carnival of Souls was the last album, but most people don't really, talk about that album too much, right?
Because that was what, 97? The Carnival of Souls?
Yeah,
96, 97.
Yeah,
it was Revenge Sessions, but released later.
Yeah, well, they did that album just right before they got back into the makeup and did the reunion tour. They were actually recording it when they were in negotiations with those guys to get back into makeup. So that's why Eric Singer was kind of pissed off at them too, because right in the middle of doing this album, they were in the background there, having meetings on the phone, was getting back with these guys. But
so let's talk about that, because that's an interesting dynamic, because I don't, again, little I know. But the fact that they'd already been playing with Eric Singer, and I don't know who the guitar player was at that time, but
Bruce Kulick.
Yeah, so those guys are already playing. They've been recording. Like that is KISS in its current indoctrination. But exactly what you're talking about is, meanwhile, there's not even back room dealing. They're literally in the same room, like, hey, we're going to step out. Not even, and they're taking these calls, organizing this. What was? I mean, I don't blame Eric Singer for being pissed off. Because am I in this band? It's not like they were. I mean, they didn't kick him out of the band. They just did a reunion tour and a little bit beyond, right? But he was still in the band. It's like a weird dynamic, right?
Well, from what I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dylan or Felipe, if you guys know about this too, but from what I understand, there was a 5-year contract that KISS had with those original guys when they re-signed back for the reunion tour.
Yes.
5 years committed contract with them, and they wanted Bruce and Eric to kind of not fall away and disappear from them. So from what I heard, they were kept for a little while on retainer, and they were even given a bulk amount of cash. I believe they said, and I could be wrong, that they were given $1 million each to sit out and wait.
Paid not to play? Sign me up, boys.
Yeah, you know what I mean? So now, don't forget, Gene and Paul and them made $250 million off the reunion tour. So $1 million is a drop in the hat for those guys, So,
I've heard something similar to that, but that also kind of goes as well with the fact that I think, I don't know, I know Peter definitely received something. I don't know about Ace, but didn't they receive like a portion of like income from like the non-makeup records going into the 80s as well?
I don't remember hearing anything about that. It's possible, but I don't remember reading anything about that. I know that what happened where Ace and Peter had the big argument was that during the reunion tour, that Ace was getting slightly more because he was getting some of the merch cut because they were saying that Ace's makeup was more popular with the audience, and that and the other thing, this is the most lamest thing I've ever heard, is that they said because Ace appeared on the Guitar magazine front covers that he deserved to get more money than Peter Criss, which is a very shady reason to give somebody more money. But but he was getting more. By the end of it, he started realizing that Ace was getting slightly more cash than he was, and it was supposed to be, there was never an even split. There was never that. But Paul always said, he goes, listen, don't. Why are you arguing about money when you're going to be a millionaire after this tour? You know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about this. So, I'm sorry, Felipe, were we gonna say something?
No, I'm just gonna compliment. I think 97, 98, there was the reissue camp, those remaster CDs, right? I think it was the first.
Yeah.
And they sound great. I bought them when they came out. They sound great. And I went to the Psycho Circus tour. They went to Brazil. It just sounded like they're playing a record. It didn't sound like a great show. So it just comes to the point. The lineup, Eric Singer and Ace Frehley was the best for sure.
Yeah, more lively.
So, so talking about this Unmasked era, I'm gonna go around each of you. What would you say from that time? Because that was essentially 80. I'm doing my 83 to early 90s. What would you say, Dylan? Like 90,
95.
95. Okay, so over
95,
a decade without the makeup in that era. And I'll start with you, Dylan. Well, what would you consider their best album during that time?
For me, it flip-flops. It's between Lick It Up and Revenge.
So the first album without the makeup, and then Revenge was the last one, or the last official one without the makeup.
Sorta, because what happened was Carnival of Souls was recorded 95, 96, put it on hold. It was bootleg for a while, then they put it out in 97 to no fanfare. So yeah, I guess technically, if you really want to break it down to its core, Revenge was kind of like the last major.
The last, like the cycle of normal album making. Yeah, I got you. Okay.
Yeah.
Mark, same question. What would you say from that period? Do you and what reason is it? I mean, obviously song preference and all that stuff's fine, but do you feel like that one album or a couple albums stood above the rest?
No, this is very controversial. You got to understand within the
Listen,
the KISS
Felipe has already pissed some people off, so Marcus, keep it going.
So I was asked before, to rank my favorite KISS albums, and when I said this, people's jaw hit the floor, and they were like, "What the hell? How could?" First of all, I placed Destroyer dead last, which people were like, "How the hell can you rank that last?"
Somebody just went through the windshield. Sorry, that's Soccer Mama and Poughkeepsie.
But my number 2 album is my favorite Unmasked album, and it's always been my favorite because I got big into the whole MTV / Much Music era of music at that point, and at this point, KISS were very hot on making videos. Okay, there was 3 of them, so I think Dylan's going to know where I'm going at with this. Asylum is my favorite KISS out of makeup album. I've always loved Tears Are Falling, Who Wants to Be Lonely, like that whole album. King of the Mountain. There's so many great songs on that album. I've always loved that album from beginning to end. I think that album gets a bad rap because of the album cover. People always complain about it, saying, "Oh, that's a ridiculous cover. Why are they using Peter's colors and Ace's colors on and Eric and Bruce?" It's like, that's nitpicking in my opinion.
Yeah, sure.
And they did, and that was one of the rare times they did 3 full-fledged videos for a record at that point. They didn't do it for Lick It Up. They didn't do it for Creatures at Night. They didn't do it for Animalize.
I think Crazy Nights has 3 videos too, right?
I think so.
3.
Yeah. So at that point, but that was very rare that they did that many videos, So they had great faith in that album, and I had to hand it to Paul Stanley. I never thought of Paul Stanley as a great record producer, but that album, I think he did a good job.
Yeah. I mean, it's thanks to him that he was manning the reins, basically.
Yeah.
All right, Felipe.
Yes.
Now we've caused multiple acts and multiple car pile up between these hot takes. I'm gonna come back to you since you started the hot take factory.
Yeah.
What would you say from this time period of the Unmasked is probably your favorite album?
I like Lick It Up too, a lot. I would say Revenge sometimes, but I agree with Marcus. I think probably Asylum. It's really good musically. Some really catchy riffs there, lyrics. Yeah, let's give some credit to Asylum. I think Asylum deserves to be more recognized.
Very good, Felipe.
No love for Crazy Nights. Guys, what?
Crazy Nights is not bad. It could be like whatever Poison album or something.
If you want Crazy Nights, put on Bon Jovi. You'll be all right.
Yeah, Bon Jovi too. Yeah.
That's the problem.
I think Asylum deserves. Yeah.
We're gonna say.
Go ahead, Felipe. I was just going to say that's the problem with KISS in general, is that what Dylan's kind of alluding to is that the problem with KISS is that they follow trends, yes, but they're always about 1.5 years or 2 years behind the trends.
Yeah, that's about right.
Yeah,
that's funny. Well,
hell, I mean, Carnival of Souls was 95. I mean, gosh, grunge was still kind of lingering, but man, if they waited around 91, 92, right when Revenge came out, prime time.
Exactly, yeah. 95 was already like Creed time. Man, that's terrible.
Yeah.
Well, so to kind of put a bow on this conversation as we're starting to kind of round third, to use the baseball analogy, I'm just going to ask the question, and this is what started this conversation. And Felipe, since it's your recommendation, I'm going to go to you. What was the better era, the masked era or the unmasked era? Now, when I say masked era, I mean, if you want to lump in when they put the makeup back on, like however you want to do it, but just in terms of your impression as a KISS fan, you got to pick one. Where do you go?
I would say if you like normalize things, put in perspective, I think musicians, I like the masked lineups better, but I think in average, I would say the masked ones, because they put two great records in the second masked. Not talking Psycho Circus, of course, but I think Sonic Boom and Monsters, they're great records.
Hell yeah!
I remember like when Monster came out, I was like, man, shoot.
That's a top 10 record for me.
I was surprised. I mean, I put that CD in the car, and I drove around. I mean, oh my gosh, it was so good. And I regret not buying the vinyl back then, but I bought the CD. But it was really surprising. Monster even better. I think. I think they were true. I mean, I remember Gene promoting this. I said, man, this is like all killer, no filler. We're gonna go for it. We're gonna record good albums, and they delivered.
Yeah.
So if they just become a studio band now, that's fine by me. But I think those records really put some weight on the balance towards the masked era for me.
All right, Felipe, I got your vote. So Dylan, where do you stand on it? It's an either or question.
All right. Do you see these faces here? This is the foundation. This is why people love this band. Of course, it's the makeup era. Now, musicianship wise, I mean, I think the lineup of Gene, Paul, Bruce, and Eric Carr, and I'll even include Eric Singer as well, technically so tight, even more so than the original. But I do think, and I hate to use the word magic, there was a sort of magic with that original lineup. It's undeniable. But even like to this day, between Eric Singer and Tommy Thayer, band's on fire. So mask for me, hands down.
Yeah.
All right, Mark, I have a feeling I know this answer, but where do you land in that question?
Well, I mean, much like Dylan, I think from a technical performance end of things, being a musician myself, I've always loved the unmasked era of KISS, but I loved the actual masked era, because I mean, I really got into KISS when they started going heavy with the conventions in the late 80s, early 90s. And there was the big thing was collecting concert videos, bootleg videos. And I have a whole library back there of VHS tapes of, a live one show, Hotter Than Hell stuff, and all kinds of different tours. And, recently there was a bunch of shows that were leaked as well. So I was like, ooh, so I had to go grab those too. So when I go into my living room and go on my lazy boy and flip up my chair and sit back and watch, I'm watching, Houston 1976 tour. I'm watching, Cobo Hall, a live one, the 3 nights, which now I finally got in their entirety, thanks to Mr. Gooch there. Thank you for leaking it. So, and I got a complete show, complete with the handing out of the gold record awards. Which was missing for a long time, that part of it. So, but it boils back to what Dylan said. Sure, technically, they probably would have played better on, let's say, the 1995 tour that they did of like South America, for example. But when you put on night 1 of Cobo Hall on the Alive One tour and watch it, there's something about that performance. They didn't have the biggest stage. They had minimal lights at that point, but everything that they had worked with them. They had everything down to a fine science. When they breathed the fire, when they did the blood parts, when Paul did his big rap in between the drum solo, when Ace had his smoking guitar parts come up, all these things connected for a show that had a great flow to it. And when it was done, you felt like you got run over by a truck watching this because it was such a fantastic performance. And, it's not the most overly complicated music to play, but that's what helped it because it wasn't so difficult to play. They could, add a little bit more pizzazz to their on-stage performances. They can do stuff like that where Paul can, put his guitar in between his legs and doing all this stuff and without it becoming too sloppy. You know what I mean? And Peter was really good back in those days. I think Peter doesn't get enough credit for being a great drummer then. I mean, the 100,000 Years, when they did that during those first 4 albums, the solos were fantastic that he did.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Oh, yeah. Mark, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring this up earlier, but before we started recording, it's on your handle on your profile here, it says your name is Marcus Almighty - say no, all caps. So that was intentional. Say no to Bob E. What exactly does that mean?
Well, as everybody knows, and you probably heard me already mention it a couple of times, I'm a big disliker of Kiss Destroyer. I've always thought that album is the biggest letdown in the Kiss catalog because, I remember the first time I ever heard that. Remember, I heard some of these songs that were on that album before on, let's say, double platinum, and I heard it also on a live too. Then I'd go and get this album, put it on, and then they started Detroit Rock City, and when they kick in with the chords, there's this piano. Dun, dun, dun. I'm like, what the hell's going on with piano? What's going on here? Is this an Elton John record or something? What's going on here?
Bill Evans, ladies and gentlemen, is here.
Yeah. And there was a lot of things in that record that I thought that were completely overblown. Like God of Thunder is such a great song, but that whole with the kids, all this talking and walkie-talkie stuff, I got so annoying to me. I couldn't stand it, hearing these kids rambling in the background of this song. And then, they do, Do You Love Me? And there's like Christmas bells going on in the background, stuff like that. Bob Ezrin loves to over-embellish songs. Don't get me wrong. I think he did a great job with Pink Floyd. I think he did a fantastic job with Alice Cooper. Oh, yes. I have no problem with him producing those guys. But Bob Ezrin needs to stay far, far away from Kiss and their albums, okay? Because he ruins them.
Yeah, I think the reworked Destroyer sounds pretty good. I like the reworked better than the original.
Oh, the remix version?
Yeah. But regarding Bob Ezrin, I know it's not the subject here, but he made a very famous double record that to me could be an EP easy. There's a lot of filler there, super boring to me.
Because Dylan, I'm not trying to start
controversy. That's called The Wall.
Pink Floyd, The Wall, yeah.
Isn't Destroyer your favorite Kiss album, Dylan?
No, all right, full disclaimer, like when I rank catalogs, it's not the biased thing of my favorite is number one. It's a weird way to approach it. My favorite is Love Gun.
Yeah.
For me.
That was my first record I bought.
For as much as Bob Ezrin kind of flipped that band around and kind of drove them away from just, basic, sex, rock and roll, whatever on those first 3 records, made it more cinematic, made it more, I guess, just more universal for someone new to approach the band, which is why a lot of people point to Destroyer as being like the go-to album. I would go as far as to say the debut is a contender for that because it's literally a greatest hits album. Yes. But in my mind, Eddie Kramer is the perfect Kiss producer.
He did Rock and Roll Over too, right?
Yep. He did those, produced obviously Kiss Alive. He did the 73 demo, Alive 2, Alive 3 as well. It's a shame he didn't do too much with them going into the 80s and 90s. But can you imagine, Mark, if Bob Ezrin had his hands on Psycho Circus? Because that was in the reins.
Exactly. I don't understand why they abandoned using them because I have to. My favorite Kiss album of all time is Rock and Roll Over, and that's Eddie Kramer's all over that. He pretty much took them, and there's interviews with Kiss when Destroyer was out, where they were saying that they panicked when that album came out. They're saying, what do we do here? Because people are already saying that, what is this? Like, this is so different. This is not like the Kiss that we know. And that's the same kind of approach that I had when I heard it. I was like, there's too much piano. There's a ballad on there. There's all kinds of stuff that was not very Kiss-like at the time. And that's why when they did Rock and Roll Over, you listen to that record. If you play Destroyer and then put Rock and Roll Over on right after it, you're like, whoa, okay. This is totally like stripped down and very raw and kind of like what most people thought Kiss was all about,
Yeah, 100%.
Good stuff. Sorry to divert from topic. I meant to bring that up earlier.
This is passionate.
Yeah. No. It's like we had a nice end of the show going, and I'm like, no, I didn't bring that up. So let's open up can of worms. So anyway, great topic, great conversation. I think it was a unanimous decision that the Masked era is the preferred era of at least this group of KISS-torians. And I can't say I disagree. But like I was telling Dylan before we started recording, I was just watching some KISS stuff on YouTube and watching them do the Unmasked stuff, and they're doing the karate kicks, and Gene's got some really, like you said, Bob, he just didn't know how to dress himself or didn't have the right stylist, because some of the clothes choices were just insane. But I Feel My Heat, I think, was the song I was listening to specifically. But anyway, great discussion. I really appreciate you guys joining us. Mark, first time having you on. I'd love to have you back. Appreciate your input. Thanks for coming on. Dylan, the record spinner, one of the smartest, is like literally, I wish that sometimes I could take your knowledge and just inject it straight into my cerebellum.
I appreciate that.
Thanks for coming on. And then Felipe, again, people, I know, I'm not even making this up. After the first Roundtable aired, I got so many emails and messages like, hold up, Felipe, Jazz Bums Felipe is into KISS, and so it opened up a whole new side of your music persona. So as always,
we can do a Sepultura roundtable, okay?
Sepultura.
Good stuff. All right, guys, thanks for joining us. We will probably do one more of these. Obviously, the timing will be interesting because we're doing this in conjunction with and I'm using air quotes, the final tour. So we'll find a good place, because I'm, like I've said numerous times, I'm going to my first show here in October. I know Dylan is going to the last Madison Square Garden show in December. So look for probably one more of these, probably in the fall, at least, or Q4. And we'll have another lively conversation then. Thanks for joining us, guys.
Thank you so much, Chance.
Yep. Take care.
Thank you, guys.
And that was another trip around the turntable. Thanks for listening to Vinyl Community Podcasts.